Ethics and Policy, and this is our illustrious leader, Vice Chancellor Battle. So,
Good evening, and excuse my voice. I don't have anything contagious, just dealing with bronchitis, so I promise you everybody else's voice will be a lot better when I sit down in a few minutes. My name is George Battle. I serve as Vice Chancellor for Institutional Integrity and Risk Management, of which the Office of Ethics and Policy is a key unit. So I want to welcome you tonight for tonight's discussion about ethics and the Olympics. Man, it really sounds terrible. This is the opening ceremony, so for opening ceremony at the Olympics for this year's celebration of Global Ethics Month. Just by way of background, the Carnegie Council, created Global Ethics Day back in 2014 with the goal of exploring the meaning of ethics in daily life and communities worldwide to identify and address society's most critical issues. Things like global pandemics, attacks on democracy, refugee crises, racial injustice, climate change, and so much more. The Office of Ethics and Policy here at UNC has expanded Global Ethics Day to Global Ethics Month. And so this is now a month-long celebration, and our theme this year is Ethics and Athletics. The events this year are tailored to address global athletics, health and wellness, well-being, inclusivity, integrity, and sportsmanship. We have several more events throughout the month, so please check our Instagram page. Office of Ethics and Policy, you'll see a QR code up there for that to follow us for more information. So now to turn to tonight's programming. So we're so grateful to have as panelists today Professor Matthew Andrews from the History Department and PhD candidate Gabriella Halsey from the Philosophy Department. Without them, this event would not be possible. Their partnership highlights the importance and value of working together across campuses, because we can only tackle these big issues by bringing together people from different perspectives and backgrounds, and that's a theme that you will see recur during Global Ethics Month, because I know I'll see you at our other programming. Finally, I want to say thank you to our Office of Ethics and Policy staff and undergraduate interns. Will you all raise your hands so people can see you? So, our summer interns planned the theme for this entire month of events, and our current fall interns have turned those plans into reality that you see today. Rinka and Georgia are tonight's facilitators, moderators rather. Jimmy is on video. All right. And Sierra will be helping you get all your questions answered. Their passion and enthusiasm make these events happen, and we can't do it without them. And I also want to point out our office staff. We have Matt Till, who's trying to hide in the back. We have Sean here and Brent as well. And they're our full-time staff, and they keep this Herculean enterprise running. So we hope that everybody enjoys the discussion tonight. We'll post the QR code to self-report attendance for the Campus Life Experience credit at the end of the panel, but we hope that you'll stick around for free pizza. Pizza's coming. And to keep the conversation going. So thank you all for being here. And before I turn it over to our moderators, I want to say that we've had Global Ethics Month here for 9 years. Is that right?
6 years.
6 years. This is our largest single event ever. So you set a record. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I will turn it over to Georgia and Rinka.
Hi everyone, my name is Rinka Dingemans. I am a public policy and political science major at UNC, and I work for the Office of Ethics and Policy as an intern. And today I'll be one of your moderators.
Hey everyone, I'm Georgia Rhoda Moorhead. I am also one of your moderators. I'm currently a junior here at Chapel Hill. I'm a double major in public policy and Spanish literature, and I'm really excited to be here. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. If you all would like to introduce yourselves to the audience, that would be amazing.
I'm Gabriella. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate here at UNC's Philosophy Department. I work mainly in ethics, and I've taught a course on sports ethics, but I'm also a fan. I grew up in Massachusetts, so Patriots, Red Sox, Celtics, Bruins. So I've got a lot of sports.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt Andrews. I'm a professor at the Department of History. I teach courses on U.S. history, mainly courses that use sports as a lens to get at political issues. But I also teach a course called the Olympic Games, A Global History, which is why I think I was asked to talk today. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Gabriella has to say and hear the questions you have as well.
Alright, well let's get into our first topic of today, is history. Starting with history is going to give us a basic understanding of where the Olympics started, where the Olympics are going, and how it's changed over time. So it will give us a basis of discussion for future questions. So our first question is, where did the Olympics come from, and what were its original goals?
Want me to do it as the historian? Yeah, is this one. How many people like the Olympic Games? And raise your hand if you... Yeah, I do too. You know, they're going to be on in June, the Summer Games, 14 days, 10 hours. I'll watch 140 hours of the Olympics this summer. Hope to actually go this summer as well. I can't not watch the Olympic Games. I'm fascinated by the Olympic Games, but over the years I've become more and more a critic of the Olympic Games. All that is to say, all of the things that I'm going to be saying, there's something about the Olympics and this idea that greatly appeals to me. Very briefly, the Olympic Games are the brainchild of a French physical educator named Pierre de Coubertin. He's a baron in France, and he organized the modern Olympic Games as an homage to the ancient Olympic Games, which ran for hundreds and hundreds of years uninterrupted in ancient Greece. And he really organized the Olympic Games for one reason. He wanted the world to be a better place. He wanted the world to be a safer place. He was concerned by all of the war and all of the unrest in the modern world, and he was one of a generation of physical educators who believed that if men, and the first Olympics were all men, if men would play sports with other men, they would get to know each other, they would get to respect each other, and the world ultimately would be a safer and better place. And that idea that through sports we can have international peace, that's the central idea of the Olympic Games. That is the idea known as Olympism. I make my students memorize that word on the first day, Olympism, the idea that through sports can come peace. That's the idea. So the very first Olympic Games were in Athens, Greece in 1896. And that's when the experiment begins.
Great. How would you say the goals of the Olympics have changed over time, starting maybe in Greece to where we are now on a political or social, and maybe even a cultural scale?
You want to go ahead? Or?
I think I will defer.
Okay. They both have and they have not changed. If you listen to the International Olympic Committee, to the IOC, they will tell you that Olympism is still their goal. And I don't doubt them when they say that. People who are members of the International Olympic Committee, I think they genuinely believe in Olympism. They genuinely believe that the world will be a better place. If every 4 years the athletes of the world gather together and play sports, athletes representing different nations, if they will come together, if Americans and Soviets will come together during the Cold War, then the world will be a better place. But of course now the Olympics are about other things too. I mean, the Olympics are about making money more and more. They were not profitable, well they still aren't actually profitable, but there's a lot of money that is generated. The Olympics have become important places for political expression throughout the decades. The IOC frowns on this greatly. They have something called Rule 50, which prevents political expression at the Olympic Games, but people do it anyway, just because there's a rule. Maybe we shouldn't tell college students this, but just because there's a rule prohibiting you from doing something doesn't mean you can't do it. And so athletes would do that. It has become a place for nations to tell stories about themselves, like when Adolf Hitler used the games in 1936 to make claims about Nazi supremacy, or when the Japanese government used the games in 1964 to tell the world that they have risen from the atomic ashes from those 2 atomic bombs that they received in 1940, or Beijing 2008 most recently kind of using the games to announce their political authority on the global stage. As the games have become more and more popular, people have used the games for more and more reasons. Some reasons that excite a lot of us, and some reasons that I think a lot of us are concerned about. Yeah, that's it.
I'd just say you're much more generous than I am. I'm not convinced that the IOC is genuinely thinks and is committed to Olympism. So I like your options.
Well, you certainly have to say that to become a member of the IOC.
Yes, that's right.
There are 104 members of the IOC. You get invited to be a member of the IOC, and you better express the idea that you believe in Olympism. You know, over the years, the heads of the International Olympic Committee, I'm thinking of guys like Coubertin and guys like Avery Brundage, they've almost stubbornly insisted on this idea sometimes. And it's very easy to kind of roll one's eyes and say, do you really believe that? Do you really believe that when people play sports with each other that all of the problems in the world are going to go away? But I just kind of see them consistently holding to that idea. Maybe they don't really believe it, but they express it so convincingly that I'm convinced that they seem to believe that idea. Yeah.
Well, that was really interesting, a lot to unpack there. Shifting gears a little bit, what considerations are taken into account when choosing a host station?
I think it's broadly a process of balancing suitability and political machinations. So my understanding, right, countries bid to compete in the Olympics, and so they have to put forth proposals, and then it seems kind of like a black box at a certain point. I remember when Boston was trying to pitch itself or I guess New England for the Olympics, and they were like, we'll have the winter, like skiing sports up in Vermont, and we will have other things in Boston. And everybody was just very angry in Massachusetts. So that's the most familiar I am, is that it's a very emotional process.
Yeah, cities bid for the Olympic Games, and it is cities, it's not nations. It's impossible to separate cities from nations. You know, when Chicago bids, you know that it's an American city, and so people were concerned what's going on in the United States. When Berlin was awarded the Games in 1936, it was impossible to ignore the fact that Berlin was part of Nazi Germany. The International Olympic Committee, yeah, looks for suitability of resources. Do you have the stadiums? Do you have the arenas? Is there reason to believe that these games will be financially successful? They want to know how you're going to pay for the games. The IOC does not pay for the games. The IOC gives some money, but individual cities pay for the games. And in the case of Boston, for example, Boston was bidding for the games in 2024. And then when the people of Boston found out that if there were cost overruns, which there are always cost overruns, cities say how much the Olympic Games are going to cost, and on average they cost 170% more than that. So they more than double in it's going to be $5 billion. Well, no, it's going to be $9.5 billion when all is said and done. And so the people of Boston, their anger was going to the polls and making sure that Boston did not host the Olympics, because they didn't want to be on the hook for the cost overrun. More and more people are doing that throughout the world. Citizens are rising up and saying, we do not want to host the games because they are so expensive, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this. So the IOC wants to see if a city can do it. I also think, to the IOC's credit, they have, over the last half century at least, all the Olympic Games used to be in Western Europe. They were in Western Europe or the United States. And the IOC has been expanding their idea of who should be able to host the Olympic Games. So the Olympic Games have been in China, the Olympic Games have been in Rio, the Olympic Games have been in Australia a few times. The Olympic Games still have never been in Africa. I don't hold your breath. I don't think it's going to happen for a long time. I don't think African cities should want to host the Olympic Games, actually, because of how many things you have to build. But so they're trying to make the games more and more global. They're not exactly rotating on a continent by continent basis, but they do want more and more parts of the world to have the opportunity to host the Olympic Games. Yeah. But really, what they want to know, what are the stadiums going to be like? Are they going to be nice? Are they going to be big? That's a major concern for the IOC.
Thank you. That actually segues perfectly into our next question. Should the requirements to be a host nation be expanded, reduced, reformed, or remain the same as we enter the modern era? You touched on it a little bit, but I'm curious if you could maybe elaborate.
It's a great question. Should the Olympics, there are 3 proposals that are out there right now. Proposal 1 is the way it goes right now, that different cities bid and the IOC, they look at all of the bids and they say, let's give it to this city. It's Europe's turn and this city will probably do it well. The problem is that every time a city hosts the games, they have to build a giant stadium. Maybe they already have it, but they have to build a big stadium. And not just a big stadium for track and field, more and more they build an archery facility and a kayaking facility and a team handball facility and a field hockey facility and a trap shooting facility, just on and on and on and on. You build all these different arenas and that costs so much money. So some people are saying, let's pick 4. Let's pick 4 cities, 4 different continents, and we'll rotate. So a city will host the games and then what would that be? 20 years later, they'll host the games again. Okay, that's a great idea, maybe, but what are the cities? Who's in and who's out, you know? Is it going to be Tokyo or Beijing in Asia? Is it going to be Los Angeles or Chicago or Los Angeles and Mexico City in North America and so on and so forth? And others say this is ridiculous, rotating is still too expensive. 1 city. Let's pick 1 city and they will host the Olympic Games every single time. Maybe it should be Athens, Greece, which is where the first Olympic Games were. It's sort of the historical home of the Games. Some people say the IOC should build their own Olympic city in Lausanne, Switzerland, and host the summer games there and host the winter games there. That's not going to happen. That's just going to cost too much money. But that proposal of rotating, that's a lot of people are talking about that. 4 or 5 different places, so the Olympics can go back and we can reuse these arenas again and again.
So thinking about what considerations should play, right? Should is a normative word, it's a moral word. So we heard financial, perhaps environmental, right, with reusing facilities. But then there's this question, how should we think about the character of the countries that are getting this privilege, if indeed it is a privilege, and I think it probably is. It's a privilege you pay for, but so the question is, what sorts of countries have the moral standing, the moral credentials to host the Olympics? Now, if we think, well, you can't have, and I think we'll get into this a little later, so perhaps I'm jumping ahead. You can't currently be at war with any other country. You can't currently have questions about how you treat prisoners. You can't have other humanitarian questions hanging over your head. You can't, be in any political spats, right? That rules out almost every country in the world. So if you want to take a moral hard line, you can do that, but you might not get to have the Olympics. So then the question becomes, what sort of moral failings can we tolerate in a country that is hosting the Olympics? What if we say, all right, we're setting aside your background moral failings, but you can't keep doing them in the Olympics. So if you're relying on migrant labor and being real jerks about that, that's fine, but you can't abuse your migrant laborers in the process of building facilities for the Olympics. First of all, that doesn't really seem fair, right? We're saying, well, it's fine if you have more, you've got ethical questions about how you treat people in general, but as long as you're building the stadium ethically, this is fine. And then there's also the question of practically whether that's possible. These stadiums require, these facilities require a tremendous amount of work. And it's not obvious that any particular country has the labor force willing and ready to build an Olympic facility in a way, on a timeline, that is morally acceptable. So you have these big picture questions about what sorts of, moral entanglements can you be involved in, and then these more particular questions about even if we set those aside, how are you going to do morally as an Olympic host, right? Some countries might be better suited to being a morally good Olympic host than others. So I think all of those things should play a role in determining who gets to host the games, but I also recognize that there's a tremendous difficulty in quantifying, right? Whether some country is morally better or more morally suited to host the Olympic Games than any other. So I don't actually have solutions, but I do have opinions.
Yeah, and this, every time Russia hosts the games, issues like this come up. When Russia hosted the Winter Olympics in 2014, it was right after they had passed a law that they called for the protection of family values. But it was basically a law that made homosexuality against the law in Russia. And so the big question is, should the athletes of the world gather in this nation? And Vladimir Putin did his best to assure people that no one would be discriminated against for their practices, and everyone's identity was temporarily welcome in Russia for these 2 weeks. And I think for the most part kind of lived up to that. But these issues, going to Beijing in 2008 and going to Beijing in 2022 when we knew what was happening with the Uyghurs. Or look, one of the things that I don't like about saying that this nation should and should not host the games is that the United States has hosted the Olympic Games 8 times. 4 summer games and 4 winter games, more than any other nation. And the United States was hosting the Olympic Games at a time when African Americans did not have civil rights in this country. The United States was hosting the games when they were involved in military ventures overseas that a lot of people found to be criminal. The United States actually never hosted the Olympic Games during the Vietnam era. I think had they hosted the games, nations would have boycotted those games. They would not have come to the United States. So Americans like to point the finger, and I know you weren't doing that. Americans like to point the finger at other nations and say, China bad and Russia bad, but of course we need to look at the practices of our own nations as well.
That's fantastic. We'll definitely continue to unpack a little bit what you guys just said as we move on into human and civil rights. But we are going to switch gears a little bit and begin to talk about the economy. So unsurprisingly, there's a very high demand for countries to host the Olympics, presumably because it puts the nation on a global stage, promotes tourism, generates jobs, creates revenue. But do these benefits outweigh the cost? A growing number of economists argue that the benefits of hosting the games are at best exaggerated and at worst non-existent, leaving many host countries with large debts and maintenance liabilities. In fact, studies actually show that the last host city to reap an operating profit was Los Angeles in 1984. So it's been a while. So my next question for you all is, how can the Olympic Committee reform the bidding and selection process to incentivize sustainable investments that actually serve the public interest?
Do you want solutions?
Possibly, yes.
What have you got prepared?
Yeah.
I don't have a solution. So I think that if we are working truly in the spirit of Olympism, then I do actually have worries about judging countries by their ability to, in effect, survive putting on an Olympic Games. So I think we could probably set aside the potential that they're going to flourish financially. If they can survive it, if they can put it on Olympic Games on sustainably, sorry, I keep saying countries, I do mean cities.
Well, business.
Yeah. Because if what we really want is people coming together competing in athletic events for the sake of peace, or in order to further the mission of world peace, then it doesn't seem like anybody should be cut out of that, given based on their ability or inability to pay or to provide a certain level of sustainable facility, as long as it's safe. Yeah, that if we're working in the spirit of Olympism, I don't think financial sustainability should prohibit the city. I think there are other things that we can consider.
As much as I like the Olympic Games, I would not wish the Olympic Games on my worst enemy. I'm from San Francisco, and San Francisco was bidding for the Olympic Games in 2012, and I just said, please, God, no. I do not want them to have the Olympic Games, because it means all of your freeways are going to be torn up, and all of the money is going to go away from the hospitals and the schools, and it's going to go into building sports stadiums, and no city can handle the millions of people who are going, the tens of thousands of people who are going to descend on the city. The traffic is just going to be unbearable. And for what? For a 2-week sports festival that you're probably not going to be able to get tickets to anyway, because all the tickets go to the corporate leaders these days. Believe me, I'm trying to get tickets to the Paris Games right now, and the corporate leaders have all the tickets. It is really, really difficult to get tickets. The historian in me wants to kind of let you know that it wasn't always like this. Very, very briefly, the games used to not cost that much money. The games were always put on in stadiums that already existed. It's actually the Japanese in 1964 that started the idea of building up, using the games to build up your city. They spent billions of dollars to do that. The games that told everyone, should have told them once and for all, but first told people that the Olympic Games are, forget about making money. I mean, you might make a little bit of money, but people say, yeah, but fine, you're going to lose money, but you're going to get tourism, and you're going to build all these things, and people are going to come to your city. The first games that were an unmitigated disaster were the Montreal Olympics in the summer of 1976. Those games ruined the economy of Quebec for the next 25, 30 years. Taxpayers were just paying higher taxes. Less money was going to schools and to infrastructure and to hospitals. The LA Games in 1984 actually did make money. One of the reasons is that LA has a ready-to-go sports infrastructure still to this day. There is a thriving sports scene there, professional and college. They didn't build an Olympic Village. They put people in the dorms of USC and UCLA. They used the swimming pool at USC. They used Poly Pavilion at UCLA for the gymnastics competition. They didn't have to build anything. So they made money. And then Barcelona came along. I know this is all before you were born, but for me it just feels like yesterday. Barcelona were the 1992 Olympic Games, and no city used the Olympic Games more spectacularly to sell a vision of their city to the rest of the world than Barcelona. There were images of the beach and La Sagrada Familia and all of the beautiful architecture there, and people watched the Olympics in 1992 and said, why have I never been to Barcelona? And tourism just roared. In fact, it's still roaring. They're trying to figure out a way to curb tourism in Barcelona now. And so they reconvinced people that having the Olympic Games was a good idea, but it has just been one economic disaster after another since Barcelona. Atlanta was not an economic disaster, it was a racial and human rights disaster, and maybe we can talk about that. Athens was a financial disaster, Rio was a financial disaster, Tokyo was a financial disaster. That was bad luck for the Japanese because that was during COVID, so that changed everything. But you will not make money hosting the Olympic Games, yet that does not stop people in Los Angeles from guaranteeing the people of Los Angeles that they are going to make money. I'll believe it when I see it. But they are just so expensive that cities just are not able to pull it off. So one solution is to just go to cities that already have an infrastructure. I mean, if I had to pick one city and just say they should host the games for the rest of the time, I don't like the jingoism of it, but I'd say Los Angeles. Los Angeles is just ready to go.
He's from California.
I am from California, but I don't want the Olympics. I don't want to be anywhere near them in my city. I want to visit them. But they are just ready to go. They have a structure. But Johannesburg, South Africa, and Nairobi, Kenya are talking about bidding for the games, and it is going to cost them $30 billion to build a sports system that can handle this. Surely there are more important things to do with $30 billion than building sports arenas for a 2-week sporting event. Do they deserve it? They deserve it. Do they deserve their chance in the sun? Absolutely. But it's just, if you're a citizen of those nations, I just don't think you want the games coming to your country.
Alright, so I think we're gonna move on to the next section of civil and human rights.
Yeah,
Do you wanna take the lead?
absolutely. Okay, so human civil rights are arguably somewhat subjective by nature, but there are some countries such as Qatar, China, and Russia who have universally accepted civil rights controversies that have applied to host or have previously hosted major sporting events. So to dive into this topic a little bit more, should countries with human rights controversies and or histories of corruption be allowed to host the Olympics, in your opinion?
Well, I stand by what I said, which is that if we did have this rule, we wouldn't have to just get rid of the Olympics. We could find such a country. But I think it matters tremendously. So there's this idea in ethics of what's called moral protest. So moral protest doesn't just have to be I'm holding a sign that says, get your hands off my body, pro-choice, or Black Lives Matter. Moral protest comes in lots of different forms. And one of those forms is what we as a society, globally or otherwise, allow people to participate in. So if somebody, say your friend, cheated on an exam, did something else that you found morally reprehensible, you often don't talk to them, or you don't want to hang out with them, right? You don't shun them, but you certainly put some distance between them and yourselves. Or I would hope that you feel annoyed that they cheated on an exam. And that's a form of moral protest. You're saying you've broken a rule, a moral rule, part of the social contract, if you want to think of it like that, but you don't have to. And there are consequences. We don't have to accept that just because you want to be included, you want to host the games, that we have to support that or be okay with it. There are some things in a society that you just can't do. Right? We accept that at the interpersonal level, and so I confess I've always found it a little bit confusing why when we scale up to the national, international level, that seems to be a much more sensitive topic. I think part of it is I would disagree a little bit with the premise of the question, only in that I do think that there are universal moral truths. That's a commitment that I have as a philosopher, and it certainly doesn't, you don't have to believe that way to think that there are some things that make you morally eligible as a country to host the games.
Well, I'm realizing how, our different disciplines are really coming out now. You're philosophizing, and I'm just telling stories. That's what historians do. Yeah, when I think of this question about, civil rights and human rights at the games, I'm struck by how Americans, over the decades have wagged their fingers at other nations. I mean, how dare you do things this way, how you do things that way. And I think about one of the greatest Olympians of all time, American or otherwise, his name is Jesse Owens. Many of you have probably heard of him. He African-American from the South, and then from Cleveland, and he went to the Berlin Games of 1936, and he discredited, Americans like to say he discredited Adolf Hitler's ideas about Nazi racial supremacy by winning 4 gold medals, and he did to an extent. And then he came back to the United States and he couldn't get a job. He couldn't find work. He couldn't monetize any of his accomplishments because he was a black person living in the United States in the 1930s. I think about the United States at the Beijing Games in 2008, when there was a lot of outrage about Beijing hosting the games because of their occupation, whatever you want to call it, of Tibet, because of their own human rights violations. You know, people who protested the Beijing Games were sent to work camps in 2008. You could not openly protest those games in China. And they were protesting the games because of China's support for the Sudanese government. There was a ghastly civil war going on in Sudan, and the Chinese were supporting Sudan in exchange for oil. So the Americans made a protest, the American Olympic Committee made a protest at the opening ceremony. They had a man named Lopez Lemon, who was a U.S. athlete, hold the American flag in the Parade of Nations. And it is a great honor to hold the flag of your country in the Parade of Nations. Lopez Lemon was one of those lost boys from the Sudan. He had grown up in the Sudan, war-torn Sudan. Now he had made his way to the United States. And he was an Olympian. And so the United States used him to wag their finger at China. You know, how dare you have this involvement in the Sudan, supporting a regime for oil? Yeah, exactly. Saudi Arabia, anyone? I mean, if I think of all the unpleasant regimes that the United States has supported over the years, it seems awfully hypocritical, which I guess gets to this idea of the relativism that's in play here. But the other thing is, you know, right, if we say anyone who has human rights violations has problems, we're not going to host the games. The IOC is learning this firsthand. Nations with democratic systems, their people are rising up, so to speak, and insisting that they don't want the Olympic Games. It happened in Boston. It happened in Krakow, Poland. It happened in Stockholm, Sweden. These were all nations that were bidding for the games, and the people either exerted enough pressure or they brought it to a vote and they said, we do not want the games here. So where have the games been going recently, and where are they going to go in the future? They are going to go to places where the people in that country cannot do that, where they cannot bring it to a vote, where they do not have a voice. They are going to places like Beijing. They are going to go to places like Russia. These are places that I think many of us would describe as human rights disasters. Those are the safe spaces for the International Olympic Committee moving forward. They're going to be in Paris, but there are going to be a lot of protests in Paris. They're going to be in Los Angeles, but there are going to be a ton of protests in Los Angeles in 2028. The Olympics are starting to figure out that maybe it's better that we go to places where people don't have a voice, where human rights is not something that people openly speak about.
That was a really interesting answer. Like we said before, we've been talking about these questions for so long now and like planning this event. And it's good to finally get some answers to these questions. So I've got the next question for you. In the same topic, should competitors from countries with these controversial happenings be allowed to participate in the Olympics? And but specifically the competitors, should they be allowed to compete under the Olympic flag? Or should there, if the countries are not allowed to participate as a nation, but then more specifically, if they are allowed to participate as a nation, are the athletes that represent that country complicit in this controversy?
I have strong opinions about this. And now I'm just dealing with the pizza.
Eyes over here, people.
So I think in the grand tradition of philosophy of offering considerations, food for thought, not any hard and fast solutions, what I would say is that it depends on whose good we think should be prioritized. So it seems uncontroversial to me that it is a tremendous honor to compete at the Olympics, and specifically under the flag of your country, to have the experience of walking out to your national anthem, wearing gear with your country's colors, flag, being an Olympian of that country. But there's also the fact that it seems, again, I think this is relatively uncontroversial, but you can tell me I'm wrong in the Q&A, that if we simply allow athletes from controversial countries to participate under the flag of their own country without remark, it looks a lot like complicity. Now, is that maybe a cheap way of scoring moral goody points if you point out, well, this athlete is Russian, but please note that Russia is currently, illegally occupying Ukraine on the telecast? Yes, it is, but it does seem very important to mark when we think that somebody has crossed the line. There are only so many ways that we as a society can do that. But it does also suck that these people who've worked their entire lives towards this pinnacle of athletic success don't get the full experience. That's hard to resolve, right? Those are two different kinds of goods. It's not just one is, there's more good to marking something as, morally objectionable by not allowing them to participate under the flag of their own country. It's not like that's more good, it's just a different kind of good. So in philosophy we call these incommensurable goods. And what do you do? I don't know.
No, I don't. I have strong opinions on a lot of things. I really don't know what the right answer here is. I mean, this is the right question. This is the question of the year. This is about Russia. What's that? No, it's true. Should Russian athletes be in Paris in 2024? I was just, where's Gabe? What are the games we talked about today in my Olympics class?
We talked about the games right before Rome 1960. That would be, should I have to go back and, hold on,
1956?
1956 in,
He was there, I know he was there. He was paying attention.
Melbourne,
Very good.
Australia.
Melbourne, Australia. Thanks, Steve. Sorry to put you on the spot there. And these games happened right as the Hungarian Revolution was going on, and the Soviet Union rolled into Budapest to put that revolution down. And there were nations that said Soviet athletes cannot be there. Soviet athletes were there, so 3 nations boycotted. They said we cannot go to these games if Soviet athletes are going to be there. It's an interesting list. Very few nations have been banned from the Olympic Games because of their political practices. South Africa and Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe, they were banned from the Olympic Games because of their racist apartheid practices. They didn't allow black Africans to represent them in the games. They were banned from the games from 1968 to 1992. Afghanistan was banned from the games in 2000 because of their medieval politics towards women. This is under Taliban rule, and the fact that women were not allowed to represent Afghanistan at the Olympic Games because of those politics. There's a question about whether Afghanistan will be there this year. The Taliban is back in charge, and we will see whether the IOC invites them back. Who else hasn't been there? Who else am I missing? I mean, it's really, that's the list, and now it's Russia. The question is, because of the invasion of Ukraine, this is a fascinating question. We will be debating this up to the games. Should Russian athletes be allowed to attend? Some people say yes. Invitations have gone out. Russia was not formally invited to Paris 2024. Belarus was not formally invited to 2024. But the proposal is, let's let them come and compete as political neutrals. The Russian flag will not be on their uniforms. The Russian national anthem will not be there when they, if they win a medal, they will compete under the Olympic flag. We'll all know they're Russians. We'll all know they're Belarusians. Russian athletes will be there, but Russia itself will not be there. Actually, Russia hasn't been there for the last 3 Olympic Games because of their state-sponsored doping system anyway. So we will see what happens there. I genuinely do not know what the right answer is. If you believe in Olympism, so maybe the IOC doesn't believe in Olympism because they have not invited Russia. If you truly believed in Olympism, it seems to me that you would say, this is about bringing, I mean, can you bring Russians and Ukrainians together in Paris in 2024? You can, but it's asking an awful lot of Ukrainian athletes to check themselves. I mean, it's a tinderbox. So it's one of these great questions. I do not know what the answer is. I don't think the IOC knows what the answer is. They're trying to figure it out right now. I think they're just kind of putting their finger in the wind and seeing which way the political winds are blowing, and they're going to try to do what's going to offend the least amount of people.
All right, I'm gonna move on to our final topic of today. We can revisit any of these topics back in the Q&A. If you want to continue talking about it, or you can come talk to anyone after, once we're having pizza, after the conversation. So we've talked about human rights, we've talked about the economy, we've talked about history, so let's move into environment. So the Olympics obviously have a pretty large effect on the global environment, not to mention the effect on local communities of the host nations. Think carbon emissions, deforestation, water pollution, erosion. During the Beijing Winter Olympics, about 500 million gallons of water were used, and a whole lot of electricity to create fake snow, or man-made snow, which took away water and diverted it away from locals who were actually experiencing an endemic water shortage.
I did not know that.
Well, it's something new every day. So the question is, like broadly speaking, is there in this current economic system of the Olympics, is it environmentally sustainable? And in what ways could the Olympics help promote sustainability? Or is there any duty at all to promote sustainability?
I think the Olympics are not sustainable. I think, I mean, for me, I don't know if you have this history, in just the discipline of philosophy, one of the things we're discussing is whether conferences should be all on Zoom, because having people fly in for 2 or 3 days just to chit chat, present papers, and hang out with their friends, not very environmentally friendly. So I don't think the Olympics are sustainable. I think if we're thinking in terms of reuse, reduce, recycle, it could be made more sustainable by hosting them in places that already have the facilities or which are environmentally suited in some other way. But then you get into this kind of difficult question about, well, if we're just going to return to places that already had the Olympics, is that unfair? Because it's not really, I mean, it's in many ways, it's just a matter of chance that they were particularly well suited to and were chosen to host the Olympics. And why should the fact that they got lucky in the past mean that they get to get lucky benefit, if you want to call it a benefit, again in the future, right? That doesn't seem like a morally worthy reason. It seems like, cool, good job. You got the Olympic Games once, and you get it again.
You all are much better at understanding what a gazillion gallons of water means, or for fake snow. Carbon emissions. These were not phrases. Carbon emissions. That's not a phrase that I have. So I have a hard time kind of figuring out what the. I know they're building some carbon emission free, or they say they are carbon emission free dome in Los Angeles. Steve Ballmer is doing it, but people who actually study it say there's no way this place is actually going to do everything that Steve Ballmer says. The thing that I want to bring up about the Olympics, and again, you're asking the right questions. Fake snow, man-made snow. I don't quite understand how much of a environmental impact that is. I'm really concerned about when the Olympic Games happen for the safety of the athletes. The Summer Olympic Games happen at the end of July and the start of August. You know why they happen at the end of July and the start of August? They happen there because American TV companies want them to happen there, so they can promo their fall TV schedule. NBC wants the games at the end of July and the end of August, so you watch Simone Biles do gymnastics and Michael Phelps swim, and they can promo all of their shows, and then you will watch their shows. At least that's what they think. That's the theory. That's why it happens. They happen in the New York City summer for reasons that have to do with American companies. It was so hot in Tokyo in 2021 that the athletes had to sign a waiver saying they would not sue the IOC if they died from the heat. If they got sick or if they died, their families would not sue. I can only imagine what Paris is going to be like. I don't know why I want to go. It's going to be hot and crowded and awful, and yet. I don't know what Los Angeles is going to be like in 2028. And if there are fires in California, like there are every summer, and the smoke, it's going to be so unhealthy. And forget about bringing the games back to Athens or to Rome. Did you see what Athens and Rome were like this summer? I mean, it was 110 degrees in July and August, and people were fainting at the Parthenon. And that's not a place for optimal athletic achievement. And it's just not a place where athletes can be healthy. The world is getting hotter. It's going to be harder and harder to host the summer games actually in the summer. And the world is getting less snowy. Came out clunky, but it is going to be harder and harder to find places that can actually host the Winter Olympic Games. Of all of the places that have hosted the Winter Olympic Games ever, the only one that is projected to have snow at the end of this century is Sapporo, Japan. So if we want to have snow at our Winter Olympics, which we do because it looks nice on TV, you're going to have to make it. Yeah, the Olympics are just going to be more and more of an environmental disaster. Every 4 years it's going to get worse and worse.
It's really interesting you say that, because when we were drafting these questions, we were kind of thinking about the impact of the Olympics on the environment, but we didn't also consider the impact it would have on the athletes as well. You know, just playing in that heat and potentially having heat stroke or dehydration, whatever it may be. Thank you for that.
Think of the dust and the pollution.
Yeah.
I mean, Beijing was just covered in dust and pollution for 8 years as they built their sports infrastructure. But they figured out a way to make it clear when the Olympics started. Somehow they figured that out.
So that actually segues into our very last question, Tid, for the Q&A. But how can these one-time use facilities become usable and or sustainable investments, whether it be through increasing housing opportunities for low-income citizens, or potentially even offering up these facilities for individuals who wouldn't otherwise get the opportunity to play a sport? If you have any insight, we would absolutely love to hear it.
Two proposals from me. One is every Olympic village in the future should immediately be converted to low-income housing in the city in which it exists. People say they're going to do that, but they often don't. But that should be one of the requirements. The IOC should say, don't just tell us you're going to do it. We want to see the plan. We want to see the numbers. We want to see the bank statements that says this is going to happen. The other thing is the IOC. Here's the problem. What cities do, like what Rio did, is they said, oh, we're going to build all these arenas and then we're going to recycle them. We're going to tear them down and we're going to reuse them for this. Or we're going to convert this team handball arena into an elementary school. It's going to be wonderful. And then they have the games and then they run out of money and then they don't do it. It's just not happening. So somehow the IOC needs to hold these cities accountable. Or really what the IOC should do is pledge that if the cities themselves cannot do it, then they will use the money that they get from the TV contracts to make sure that these things actually happen. The IOC has a great gig going on right now. They get cities to bid for the games, they fly in, they enjoy it, and then they leave, and then they leave the mess for the cities to figure it out. They kick in a few tens of millions of dollars here and there, but almost all of it comes from the cities themselves. I think the IOC needs to be put on the hook for this. But how do you make an international organization that is beholden to no one nation's laws accountable, it's kind of impossible. So they'll probably just keep on doing what they do.
Yeah, so I think there are some very real logistical challenges to repurposing Olympic facilities. And I think one of the greatest ones is actually that the kind of construction that we're talking about, so modular construction or construction that, you know, is going to be durable, like we're going to turn this indoor court into an elementary school, that's a different standard of building than if you're just building something to last and look pretty for 2 weeks. So there's actually, I think there's a sneaky disincentive to make Olympic facilities reusable in this way. Even if on paper or in press releases, they're presented as being reusable, because good construction is expensive. I agree that if you're going to build something for 2 weeks, you're going to spend all this money, that's just dumb. That's just very dumb. So how do we enforce proposals to have Olympic facilities be reused? I'm a big fan of the boycott, but I'm also not in charge of all of the countries and deciding what they do. I think it would be very difficult, but as you pointed out, right, the IOC is a sweet deal,
Yeah.
so you have to unsweeten it somehow. I don't know enough about international law to say this with complete certainty, but I'm pretty sure there's no real mechanism for, I mean, you can't put the ball on Interpol's most wanted list and say we're just going to arrest you.
No, the only way it works is if we stop watching
Right.
and we let them know we're not watching, because that's the only way it works.
But we love some of that.
But we love- Yes.
But, I mean, if it's something you're concerned about, you should think about not watching the Olympics. Right? If you, I know.
No, I know,
I'm
it's
sorry.
it's hard. We all, you know, we all
I mean,
daily lives.
Full disclosure, I watch football and college sports, and I have very serious ethical concerns about both of those things. So do as I say, not as I do, like this. But how do we make the Olympics more sustainable? Right, there's the practical question, and then there's the incentive motivation question. I think we can solve, and probably have solved, the practical question of how do we make these facilities reusable, broadly speaking. But the motivational question, getting people to actually do it, is quite a bit for me.
The IOC knows we're watching. The IOC recently released something called Agenda 2020. It was released in 2020, and they said it's their reforms moving forward. We've heard the complaints. Some people think it's a real attempt at reform. Some people think it's just an attempt to rebrand themselves and look like they care. I tend to fall in that camp and think that's what the IOC is doing. But they have said, for example, we will care more about human rights moving forward. Does that mean they won't be going back to China? Does that mean they won't be going back to Russia? We will see. They say that they care more about the environment. They want all games to be green games. They say that they care about these things. They are starting to say, for example, it used to be that a city had to have all the arenas in that one city, or they would not go there. Now they're saying, you know what, it's fine. Well, we can make this a little more regional. So if there's a basketball arena 100 miles that way, then fine, we can have the basketball there. They're expanding their idea about what a host city or a host region can look like. They know they're being watched. They're expressing these ideas. We will see how meaningful Agenda 2020 and these reforms are moving forward.
All right, well, thank you so much. I think that concludes our questions.
And so we've got a QR code. If you haven't had the chance to submit your question and you really want to, this is your chance to do it. Sierra, you want to go ahead? Yeah, so first off, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. So we've been collecting
collected questions so far, and I think what we're gonna do is let you guys take a little bit of a break. We have about 30 more minutes. We're gonna do pizza and dialogue, so you guys can come, get some pizza, get a drink, and you can stick around to hear the answers to some of the questions that people have put into the Google form so far. Does that sound good? Yeah. Yeah, then once everyone settles back down, we just get started with the answers to the questions. They're on a new target venue for the 2024 games.
Great choice. You can't surf in Paris, so why not? This does go along with the idea of, being able to expand your perimeter for sports. I suppose what they could do in Paris, there's this surf ranch out in central California that I've been to, and it's awesome. It's this gigantic swimming pool where they make the same size wave every single time, and you can surf for about a minute on it. And so people come from all over the world to use it. The thing costs $1 gazillion. They could make that in Paris, but I'm glad they're saying, no, let's go somewhere else. And they're honoring people who were some of the first people of surfing. Hawaii would be an appropriate place, and Tahiti would be an appropriate place. So I think it's good that they're thinking about Frenchness. That's the French too. They think about it very expansively. I think it's good that they're thinking about Tahiti in that way. So I think it's appropriate, and it's a chance for people in Tahiti to kind of get their moment in the sun without having to build anything. It's kind of perfect.
I think it's deeply complicated, right? The legacy of French involvement in Tahiti is kind of gross. And right, there's this really plausible moral objection, which is that this is just kind of extractive. This is you're showing up for 2 weeks, you're using a particular resource, maybe you're not making a profit, but you're certainly benefiting from it, and then you're out. And at least, right, when you host the Olympics in your own city, you have to, you have to live with the consequences. But there's a much greater level of physical and perhaps emotional alienation and distance that you get as somebody in Paris or as somebody French. And I think I understand that it makes sense, like in the cultural narrative, perhaps, as a pitch, but I think it's not.
That's a better answer. Can I change my answer? I'm going to go with that answer. I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting about surfing, and I've been thinking about there are those, for example, there are people. One of the things we did talk about with the Olympics is how you have to represent a nation at the Olympics. You can't just show up as an individual and say, my name is Matt, and I'm good at this, and I should be able to compete. I have to go representing a nation. And there are a lot of people, this is an ethical issue, who are representing nations that they don't identify with. And so, for example, one of the movements in American sports are coming from Hawaiian surfers who don't identify with the United States. That American flag is the flag of the imperialist conquerors. They want to compete in the Olympics as Hawaiians, especially since that seems to have been where surfing was invented. And so that's an interesting issue moving forward. There are first people from Canada who don't want to represent Canada. There are Aboriginals in Australia who don't want to represent the Australian flag, and there are Hawaiians in the United States who don't want to represent the United States flag. So surfing is one of the sports in where these issues are being expressed.
Okay, so the next one says, what about the corruption of the IFC officials? How does the Olympics expect countries to be ethical for hosting the Olympics, for example, workforce, when they themselves use unethical means to vote for that country?
Well,
That's a great question.
this is a really great question. So, very, very big picture. It's not, right, there's disagreement about what this question asked, which is basically, does hypocrisy does being a hypocrite make you ineligible to judge other people for the same moral failings? I don't think it does, but that's a personal view. But if you do think there's something wrong with being hypocritical, I don't think the IOC is concerned about that. And whether somebody else is doing things, is being good, doesn't really bear on whether you have reason to do the right thing, right? I mean, would it be more convenient perhaps if you could say, well, they are cheating on their test, or they're not following the rules, so I don't have to. Sure, but that's not how morality works, right? It's not. You don't get an excuse just because somebody else isn't doing the right thing. Now, somebody else doing something morally bad might change the morally right thing for you to do. So if you're living in a place where abortion is illegal, and you think it's morally right for me to follow laws, but then you have a friend who needs to end a pregnancy, you might think, well, the fact that these laws, right, are restricting people from accessing reproductive care doesn't make it okay for me to help my friend get an abortion, but it might mean that the moral calculus changes such that breaking the law is morally permissible. So I don't know that the two are morally connected, but I agree with this, certainly with the spirit of the question that, crap in, crap out, right? If we've got an immoral process, what are the odds that we're getting like a moral post-mortem?
Yeah, thanks for being here and sticking around. First of all, it's nice to see some people sticking around. Yeah, I think I'll go for the spirit of the question, not really answer it, but just let you know what lays behind that question. There's a long history. We now know that IOC members have been bribed, left and right, in order to vote for cities to host the Olympic Games. When you work for the IOC, you don't get paid. It's technically a volunteer. But there are world-class, and I mean world-class perks. You stay in the world's best hotels, and you eat in the world's finest restaurants, and you drink the world's greatest wines during the Olympic Games. It is a good gig to be a member of the IOC. And because when cities have feverishly been competing to get the games, they've just been bribing IOC members. The games that kind of broke the story were the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics, 2002. It turned out that people in Salt Lake City were giving plastic surgery to the wives of IOC members and free tuition at BYU for their kids. And there was one member of the IOC, I can't even remember his name, he sucked up so many goodies that he was known as the human vacuum cleaner. He just got so much stuff. And so the IOC, when this story broke, said, our bad, we're not going to do that anymore. They say they don't do this anymore. I don't know, I doubt it, I'm sure they do, but that's what they say. So behind the question, it's a great question. I'm not going to answer it, but just to reiterate the question, how can we expect cities to behave ethically when the IOC itself is not behaving ethically, and we have evidence that they are not behaving ethically?
Another question that came in is, what do you teach your children about the 1972 USA Olympics basketball team? Right or wrong to disavow the outcome and decline the silver medal?
Who asked that? That's a good one. Yeah, I know about it, yeah. By my children, you mean like the students in my classroom, or yeah?
I go back and forth on it all the time.
Yeah, so in case you don't know, what happened in Munich is, well, it was an athletic fiasco. The United States had never lost an Olympic basketball game, ever. They were 49-0 going into the gold medal game against the Soviet Union. And they hit 2 free throws with 3 seconds left. A guy named Doug Collins hit two free throws with 3 seconds left to go up 1. And the Soviet Union, through a bunch of scorekeepers and officials' errors, got 3 attempts to replay the last 3 seconds. They failed the first time, they failed the second time. They succeeded magnificently on a length of the court pass to lay it in and win the game 51-50. And the U.S. is, after the second failed time, the U.S. team was celebrating for a whole minute before the officials were like, wait a minute, we got a problem here, and they made everyone come back on the court and they replayed it again. The American players are so upset by that to this day they have not accepted their silver medals. They're sitting in a vault in Lausanne, Switzerland. Something that people in the United States see as a very principled stand against an athletic injustice, not a racial injustice or human rights injustice, but a sporting injustice. But something that people around the rest of the world see as evidence of pretty bad manners by the Americans, and that the Americans are bad sports, and they're not willing to go with what the officials have said. Yeah, go and watch the end. It's fat. I show it in the Olympics class. It's just have to see it to believe it. The short answer is this: the Americans got jobbed, but had any of the rulings gone the other way against the Soviet Union, they would have gotten jobbed. It was just poorly managed from start to finish, and the Americans were just on the bad end of it. But to not have replayed those 3 seconds, and I won't go into all the technical reasons, would have been unfair to the Soviets as well. But yeah, I'm interested in the reactions, how Americans see it as taking a stand in the rest of the world, like with the flag. You know, the parade of nations, every nation has their flag, and almost all nations dip their flag as they go by the host of the King of England or the President of Brazil, whoever it is, they dip their flag out of respect. Americans never dip the flag. In fact, it's illegal now in the country. Congress said you cannot dip the flag to heads of state. Something that Americans see as, take great pride in, but something that the rest of the world sees as evidence of American hubris and pretty bad manners in the United States. Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, I'm ambivalent too. Yeah.
So we're like right at almost 6:30 right now. I'm just gonna ask one last question. This is just in the middle of one question that someone asked, but with the Olympics, do you see the growth of the sport in the Middle East, like what is happening with the Saudi soccer league?
Okay, sorry, could you, what's happening with it? Yeah.
Yeah, there's the growth in the soccer league in the Middle East, so is that something that you see happening with the Olympics as well?
I mean, empirically, I think we were talking about this during the pizza break. The Middle East is only going to host more international sporting events. That just seems kind of inevitable for many things that you mentioned, right? Desire financial suitability for doing so. I see it as the same way I would see any place that is hosting Olympic Games that has these particularly bad human rights abuse records. I see it as a tragedy, right? I don't know what we're, again, in the spirit of Olympism, I don't know what we're celebrating if we're going and having this big sporting event of international peace, and that is premised on people being systematically deprived of peace. It's fun to watch, but I think it's not in the spirit of what we're purported to be doing when we put on, watch, celebrate the Olympics.
It's coming. The Olympics in the Middle East, the Olympics in Saudi Arabia or Qatar or whatever, it's a match made heaven, hell, I don't know, it's one of those two. The Saudis are becoming so proficient in what people are calling sports washing. It's a phrase you gotta know if you pay attention to sports and politics. Sports washing refers to using sports to present a sort of pleasant and friendly vision of a regime. So the Saudis say, oh, we're a fun place to go and a fun place to visit, and we're not a place that requires women to get their father's permission to be married, and we're not a place that whips people for being homosexuals, which is what they do in Saudi Arabia. There's a history of sports washing. In my Olympics course, the Berlin Games of 1936, they are an early example of sports washing. The Nazi regime used those games to present a kind of friendly, majestic, reasonable vision of themselves to the rest of the world. Do not believe the critics, what people were saying about us. We are reasonable people, cultured people, and they put on a reasonable and beautiful Olympic Games, and it was all a smokescreen for what was coming next. The Saudis are doing this with golf, they're doing it with Formula One racing, they're doing it with esports. Now the NFL is going to have a game in Saudi Arabia in the next 10 years probably. It just seems like it's just got to happen. Yeah. Does it make it right? No, but is it going to happen? Yes, it's going to happen.
Okay, I think we're done with the questions now. It's about 6:33, so thank you guys for sticking around.